Okay. Good morning. My name is Jim Kolb, and today's program is going to cover a lot of ground. It's Broadway song lyrics through the ages, from George and Ira Gershwin to Stephen Sondheim. To put it in a context, I want to mention a couple of things as background. First of all, there were in the teens and 20s two different ways of writing songs. One was called Tin Pan Alley, and the other was Schubert Alley. Now, Tin Pan Alley was located around West 28th Street, and it provided songs for vaudeville performers, for people traveling across the country. There were thousands of performers needing new material, and as a result, Tin Pan Alley was the source. You created songs that would appeal to an audience. Schubert Alley, on the other hand, referred to songs that were composed specifically to serve the purposes of a musical. And they were never completely separable, but we'll look at some of the Tin Pan Alley types and then move into the main idea here, that songs were written for specific shows to depict certain characters. But initially, songs were very often topical. College, for a certain part of the American public, began to be something that young men and women, called sheiks and shebas, attended regularly in the 1920s. And so as early as 1917, Jerome Kern, Guy Bolton, and P.G. Woodhouse had created a musical called Leave It to Jane, one of the first so-called integrated musicals in which the songs served the story. But the songs included Cleopatra, about English courses she was taking and studying Shakespeare, a siren song because the young women thought that they were like the sirens of ancient mythology. So it did have some topical appeal. It really was commenting on the new young men and women of America. And that was followed by The Good News in 1927, another musical set in a college campus. That later became a film. And it had a mixture of songs, certainly Old Tate College, and some of the songs were very much songs intended to reveal college life. And one of the famous lines in a song was, "We came here to learn to sin, not to think." And they were making gin in their bathtubs, so it really was a commentary on prohibition in the 1920s, on the misbehavior of college students. But it included famous numbers like the Varsity Drag and The Best Things in Life Are Free, which the moon belongs to everyone. The best things in life are free. Well, this is the football player singing this to a young girl who's tutoring him because he has to pass his astronomy exam in order to play in the big football game. So the moon makes sense. When they made the film, they turned it into a French lesson, and they lost some of the connections that the stage version had. But again, it was college, and there were many other college songs that came out in the 1920s, many not connected with a show, but simply intended for the vaudeville stage. The motor car was another, the automobile was another topic of many songs, including one of the longest titles of a song, "He'd have to get under, get out and get under to fix up his automobile." That was 1908. By the 1920s, "Come On, Spark Plug" was a comment on a car that was not functioning properly. And then in 1927-28, a song called "Henry's Made a Lady Out of Lizzie." Now, the Tin Lizzie was the Model T Ford. The Model A had just come out, which was seen as a huge improvement, and immediately it was set to song, just as Lindbergh's Return from Paris led to songs and dances celebrating Lucky Lindy. Prohibition was another topic that prompted lots of songs. 1919 especially, Alcoholic Blues, "What do you do on a Saturday night when the bars all close?" "You Can't Make Your Shimmy Shake on Tea," that was a song by Irving Berlin for the 1919 Ziegfeld Follies. Also in the 1919 Ziegfeld Follies, Bert Williams, the black comedian who was a star of the Follies, wrote a song called "Everybody Wants a Key to My Cellar," which is where I keep my booze. So the public came to the theater, whether it was vaudeville or the Follies or a book musical, and appreciated the connection with their lives. Home ownership was yet another topic. The Little White House at the end of Honeymoon Lane was a song from Honeymoon Lane, a musical of 1926. Tea for Two, a year earlier, and No No Nanette, was about a young couple who hoped to marry, move to the suburbs, and have a house with a boy for you and a girl for me. So again, the stereotype of what the public was desiring very often shows up in the popular songs, the Tin Pan Alley songs, usually of the 1920s especially. Irving Berlin with Alexander's Ragtime Band. It's a popular song written just for the stage. It was sung in vaudeville. He created a theater, the Music Box, which is still on in New York, and he presented Music Box reviews in that theater, one of which in 1924 included the song All Alone by The Telephone, waiting for a ring-a-ding, waiting for his girlfriend to call him on the phone. George and Ira Gershwin, Swanee. George did that not with his brother Ira, but with Irving Caesar, and he composed it for Al Jolson. Al Jolson never met a song he didn't like, and Al Jolson loved the fact that he could do a book musical in the first act and then do a concert in the second act. That was his approach to the musical theater. It was to show off his voice, and Swanee in 1919 became a major hit for him. When George started working with his brother Ira, they worked on book musicals, but they were relatively feeble musicals. The criticism of 1920s musicals is that 61 of them used Cinderella as their plot. And in 60 out of 61, Prince Charming came from Long Island, which was considered heaven for people stuck in Manhattan. And it was a poor girl who meets the rich man and marries him by the end of the show. Swonderful was a song that Ira wrote the lyrics to in 1927 for Funny Face. And Swonderful really took advantage of the fact that we spoke a different language in the 1920s. We shortened words. It's wonderful became swonderful. I have a passion for you became a pash. I feel emotion became emotion. And it was a whole pattern in the song that an audience could connect with because that's the way we were talking. And Ira really sought to be as close to popular speech as possible. And that really is one of the goals of lyric writing, is to sound like real people even though they're singing. Rodgers and Hart in 1925. Lorenz Hart was Richard Rodgers' partner for 22 years. In 1925, they had their first success. It was a review, a variety show, but it included one of their first hit songs, Manhattan. The Bronx and Staten Island, too. Going to the Zoo. It was a tour around New York City. So again, an audience which in the 1920s was probably 95% New Yorkers attending the theater in New York could connect with this kind of material. And that really was the goal from then on. As we move into book musicals, we want to tell a story through song, but we want the songs really to reflect character and situation. And the first show to successfully do that in a powerful way was in 1927, Showboat. That was by Jerome Kern and Oscar Hammerstein II. Oscar Hammerstein II worked with Jerome Kern on a number of occasions in the 1920s and early 30s, and only became Richard Rodgers' partner in 1942. But in the 20s and 30s, Hammerstein had a hand in many powerful shows, including Showboat. Who Cares If My Boat Goes Upstream? A song that really, I'm sure, didn't have much of a life outside the theater, but it served the character of Gaylord Ravenel, who was a gambler on the Mississippi. And it leads into his first encounter with Magnolia, the woman he falls in love with, marries, later divorces. So we have some serious subject matter derived from Edna Ferber's novel, Showboat. Who Cares If My Boat Goes Upstream moves into a love duet, Only Make Believe I Love You. And Oscar Hammerstein discovered something with that song that he carried with him for the rest of his career. If I'm going to write a love song early in the show, how do I do it before we see that the people are falling in love? Well, he discovered the subjunctive case. Let's imagine. What if? So it's only make believe I love you. but it leads to the real thing as the show goes on. And we'll see that later. He uses it with Richard Rodgers in Oklahoma, in Carousel. If I Loved You in Carousel is another example of it. It was his device for getting the love couple together early in the show. Following Kern and Hammerstein's Showboat in 1927, the next major success in terms of a book musical was in 1931, George and Ira Gershwin, Of Thee I Sing. 1931 was the year before a presidential election, and it was a musical, a parody of the American political system. Wintergreen for president, loves the Irish and the Jews. That's the entire lyric for the song. But Wintergreen is appealing to two major elements that he would need to get elected. It also includes a patriotic song with a twist, Of Thee I Sing, Baby, because he has put his platform based on love. He will marry the woman he loves if he's elected president. Well, he gets elected president, his wife has twins, and they then try to impeach him and discover they can't really impeach a president who's just had twins. But it really is a takedown. It's in the style of Gilbert and Sullivan, and George Gershwin said, I want to compose in that style, because Gilbert and Sullivan did put great emphasis on the book, on the text. And Of Thee I Sing won the Pulitzer Prize for the first time for a musical because of the seriousness of the parody that was being done. Richard Rodgers and Lorenz Hart in the 1930s carry on that tradition in a number of book musicals, including Jumbo, Boys from Syracuse, Pal Joey. That takes us from 1935 to 1940. Jumbo is set in a circus, and it included circus acts on stage, but it included songs that were about the circus over and over again. The only way one learns a routine is to do it thousands and thousands of times, and it's a song that celebrates that aspect of circus. It also had love songs like The Most Beautiful Girl in the World, sung by Jimmy Durante in 1935 as the ringmaster. Boys from Syracuse, based on Shakespeare's play The Comedy of Errors. In The Boys from Syracuse, we have a number of anti-love songs because Lorenz Hart liked to set up and send up the idea of falling in love. So one song, falling in love with love is falling for make-believe. In another song, Antipholus has fallen in love with a woman, and he says, this can't be love, it feels too good. And so the songs do serve the farcical aspects of the Comedy of Manners. They became hit songs outside the show, but they really did serve the storytelling purpose of the show. Even more so, Pal Joey in 1940 was set in the south side of Chicago. It was an elder woman keeping a young man. She was married and wealthy. She bought a nightclub for him. He cheated on her, and that ultimately led to her telling another woman, take him and do what you can with him. But it also had a song, Our Little Den of Iniquity, where they went to make love. And it included a huge hit song, although if you only know Frank Sinatra's version, you don't know the song, Bewitched, Bothered, and Bewildered. That's the older woman singing about this young man she's in love with, and one line, horizontally speaking, he's at his very best, was not a line sung by Frank Sinatra. It was made into a generic song, but it had a very specific purpose, and it was a very long song. Now, Tin Pan Alley in the 20s had the idea that we have to write a love song in 32 measures. Well, Jerome Kern, Richard Rodgers, the composers who followed, said, no, that's far too limiting. And so they moved into a much broader landscape in the popular song and musicals, and in some cases that probably worked against the song's commercial success, but it served the purpose of the story. As we move into the 1940s, Lorenz Hart, who loved doing Pal Joey because it was about naughty people, was asked by Richard Rodgers, would you like to do a cowboy musical? Because the Theater Guild had asked Richard Rodgers if he would consider turning Green Grow the Lilacs, the play that had been staged by the Theater Guild in the 1920s, if he would turn it into a musical. Larry Hart said, I don't want to work in a damn cowboy musical. He said, find a new partner. Richard Rodgers did and Oscar Hammerstein II, and they had a partnership that lasted for the next 17 years until the death of Oscar Hammerstein in 1960. Their first show was Oklahoma, based on that cowboy play from the 1920s, and virtually every song became a hit song, in spite of the fact that they really wouldn't work in any other show. They were very specific to that show. The show started with an old lady churning butter on stage and a voice in the wings without orchestral accompaniment singing, "Oh, What a Beautiful Morning." It had character songs. Ado Annie was a bit of a naughty girl, and she sings, "I Just Can't Say No." You know, if a man tries to kiss me, I have to give in. The speculative song, the subjunctive song in this case, was "People Will Say We're in Love." Curly asking Laura, don't throw bouquets at me, don't look at me too much. People will say we're in love. They are in love, but he doesn't want to admit it yet. That idea of the subjunctive goes even further in 1945, their next musical, Carousel, in which a 3-minute song, the idea of Tin Pan Alley, becomes a 12-minute song, which has 7 different melodies in it. It begins with "You're a Queer One, Julie Jordan," and then it develops into a duet between Billy Bigelow and Julie Jordan, "If I Loved You." But the entire scene, sung, takes 12 minutes. Now, as a commercial song, "If I Loved You" became a 3-minute. It would fit in a 78. But in the show, it took 12 minutes to do the scene because it was a much more elaborate musical piece. And that again was the revolution in songwriting that was happening, especially in the 1940s, although Jerome Kern and Oscar Hammerstein had anticipated it in Showboat in 1927. That idea is carried even further, and I think most successfully, in Rodgers and Hammerstein's next show, South Pacific, in which virtually every number served a purpose. "Cockeyed Optimist," "Some Enchanted Evening," "There Is Nothing Like a Dame," sung by the Soldiers, "I'm Gonna Wash That Man Right Out of My Hair." Mary Martin did that literally for more than 2,500 performances. She washed her hair on stage every night. "You've Got to Be Carefully Taught," a song about racial prejudice, a song that the producers kept wanting Rodgers and Hammerstein to cut, and they kept insisting it had to stay in. Lieutenant Cable falls in love with a Polynesian girl. And one of those ironic things, Joshua Logan was directing South Pacific, and he hated this one song, the love song between Lieutenant Cable and Fiat. And he says, get rid of that song. So they replaced it with "Younger Than Springtime." But 2 years later, Josh Logan was sitting in the theater at the opening night of King and I and said, "I heard that damn song that I asked them to get rid of in South Pacific. It was Getting to Know You, getting to know all about you, getting to like you, hope you like me." It makes sense for Cable to be singing that to this young woman, but Logan didn't like the song, so "Younger Than Springtime" replaced it. But waste not, want not. If you have a song that you think works, you find a place for it. And songs aren't totally interchangeable, but in both cases, we had situations where the words in that song could work. Irving Berlin, who had spent his early career doing revue musicals, turned to the book musical in the 1940s under the encouragement of Rodgers and Hammerstein. They produced "Annie Get Your Gun" in 1946. And again, many hit songs, but songs that essentially serve the purpose of the characters. You can't get a man with a gun, Annie complains, because she feels she's got male talents, but how does she get a man using those male talents? Doing what comes naturally. They say it's wonderful. My defenses are down. I got lost in his arms. Anything you can do, I can do better. A competition between Ado Annie and the man she's falling in love with. And it also had one song that Irving Berlin thought, well, maybe I shouldn't do that song. Rodgers and Hammerstein don't seem to respond to it. And so he kept cutting it out of performances where he was looking for the budget, the funding for the show. And Hammerstein said, "Why do you keep cutting that out?" And he said, "Well, I didn't think you liked it." he said, put it back in. There's no business like show business. Almost did not make it into the show because Irving Berlin didn't think it was good enough. Irving Berlin had previously done that in 1918 with a song that sat in his drawer for 20 years until 1938 because he just didn't think, he thought it was too sentimental. And then in 1938, Kate Smith contacted him and said, I'm performing on Armistice Day, now Veterans Day, on the radio, and I would like a patriotic song. Berlin says, well, maybe I've got something. He had to do a little adjustment to it, but he gave her God Bless America. As the war clouds gather far across the sea, thank goodness we're in a land of the free. That's the verse that leads into the chorus, God Bless America. Berlin had intended that for a military musical in 1918 and thought it was too sentimental. So it took him 20 years. So his habit of not trusting his own material was characteristic of his career, but when he created something, it really did serve a purpose. So we have Rodgers and Hammerstein with the book musical, now Irving Berlin. Almost immediately after that, Alan J. Lerner and Frederick Lowe, Lerner and Lowe, found in Brigadoon that they could tell a story through song. The Heather on the Hill, Come to Me, Bend to Me, Almost Like Being in Love. Songs that became commercial pop hits, but that really did serve the characters in that musical. Burton Lane and Yip Harburg, a year later, same year as Brigadoon, 1947, created Finians Rainbow, another show that had a very social message. Yip Harburg was a real leftist, and he wrote Brother, Can You Spare a Dime back in 1930. He knew the country's political difficulties, and this was a racial musical about the position of African Americans in the South in 1947, and it had a powerful score. Again, songs that moved into the popular theater. How Are Things in Glockamora? If This Isn't Love? Old Devil Moon? When I'm Not Near the Girl I love the girl I'm near. It's a little leprechaun who sings that. Look to the Rainbow. Beautiful songs, but they did serve the purpose of this musical. Cole Porter, I didn't mention Anything Goes because that was really not so effective as a book. It's been revised and revised almost every time it's revived. The book just didn't work, but the songs were pretty impressive. But in 1948, he created a really powerful book musical, again based on Shakespeare, Kiss Me Kate. And Kiss Me Kate has songs that have to do with the fact that they're doing Taming of the Shrew, the fact that they are theater people, another opening, another show in Boston, Philly, or Baltimore. They're on tour doing previews of a show they hope to take to New York. We meet the lead couple who were married at one point, still have to play together on stage, but hate each other off stage. Well, that changes by the end of the musical. I've Come to Wive It Wealthily in Padua derives from Shakespeare's text. I Hate Men, Were Thine That Special Face, Too Darn Hot. It's in an alley in Baltimore behind the theater, and it's too darn hot. Where Is the Life That Late I Led? And a song for two gangsters who are pursuing a debt that's owed, and they discover the theater's really a neat place. Brush up your Shakespeare. Start quoting him now. It served the purpose of a show about Shakespeare and about a Shakespeare play, but it became a hit outside the show as well. And so the Schubert Alley, Tin Pan Alley divide is not as great as it sometimes seems to be. You could have it both ways. Frank Lesser discovered that in 1950 with Guys and Dolls. Runyon Land, Fugue for Tin Horns, where else would you put a song with that kind of name? This is a song about gamblers and the Salvation Army, and about the way in which these two groups came to understand each other in the course of this musical. Adelaide's Lament, in which a woman complains that her gambling boyfriend always postpones the wedding so that he can go and bet. Frank Lesser went on to create another musical that had, as he said, a lot of music in it, and that was in 1956, The Most Happy Fella. The Most Happy Fella, had he not had a good producer at Columbia would have been really marginalized on record. It took 3 LPs. It now takes 2 CDs to include the entire score, because 90% of the show was sung. So we see that kind of popera later with Andrew Lloyd Webber, with Stephen Sondheim, but it was done first by Frank Loesser with The Most Happy Philip. It included operatic quality duets, but it also included Joey, 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 standing on the corner watching all the girls go by. I Come from Big D, My Oh Yes, Dallas. So it had pop songs in it, but it required a bass baritone opera singer to play Tony, the old man who falls in love with a young girl. It requires good singing. And the songs really served character and story development. Richard Adler and Jerry Ross had a very brief career. Jerry Ross died at the age of 29. But in a little over a year, they created 2 shows that again had very, very dramatic point to them and produced popular material. 1954 was the Pajama Game. 1955, Damn Yankees. And between them, I'm Not at All in Love, I'll Never Be Jealous Again, Hey There. This is Sid singing to his dictating machine, and then he has a duet with the machine as he sings it, plays it back. There Once Was a Man, Steam Heat, Think of the Time I Save, Hernando's Hideaway, a number of hit songs, but they served the story of a Midwestern pajama factory seeking a 7.5-cent raise. Damn Yankees. Anyone coming to the theater in 1955 in New York probably was a Yankees fan. Well, there were Dodgers fans and Giants fans in those days, too. You Gotta Have Heart, 6 months out of every year. Shoeless Joe from Hannibal Moe, A Little Brains, A Little Talent, Whatever Lola Wants. Again, numerous songs that had a life outside the theater, and yet they worked only in a baseball musical. So you could have it both ways. You could serve the purpose of the book, you could serve character, and still have success with the songs. Yet another composer of the 1950s, and this period, 1943 to 1964, starting with Oklahoma, ending with Fiddler on the Roof, was the highlight, the high point, the golden age of the book musical. Julie Stein was involved with several of those. In 1956, Bells Are Ringing. Book and lyrics by Betty Comden and Adolph Green. Long Before I Knew You. The Party's Over. Just in Time. This is about an answer phone. We don't need those any longer, but it was an answering phone service in New York City. 1959, Julie Stein had another huge success with Gypsy. It won no Tony Awards because Gypsy was competing against Fiorello and The Sound of Music. They split the Tony Award. They were both named Best Musical. Gypsy came in third. But Gypsy has been revived in 4 major revivals since then. And again, it has a set of songs that really serve the story of an egotistical mother wanting to live an enjoyable theatrical life through her children. Songs that have become everyday hits. Everything's Coming Up Roses, Let Me Entertain You, Some People, All I Need Is the Girl, Small World, Together Wherever We Go, You'll Never Get Away From Me. I mean, it's just endless, the power of those songs. And they really did reveal the power, the desire of Madame Rose, the mother of Gypsy Rose Lee. 5 years later, in 1964 was a big year. There were 3 huge hits that year. I already mentioned Fiddler on the Roof. There was also Funny Girl by Julie Stein. And Jerry Herman's Hello Dolly was the third one. So Julie Stein's Funny Girl, lyrics by Bob Merrill, again based on a real character, including My Man, a song originally sung by Fanny Brice, but the rest of the show was composed by Julie Stein in the style of the 1920s and 1930s, the period when Fanny Brice was most active on the stage and then on radio and in film. If a Girl Isn't Pretty, I Am the Greatest Star, Secondhand Rose, His Love Makes Me Beautiful, and the biggest hit of all, People, and Don't Rain on My Parade. So this is the life of Fanny Brice, and the songs reveal aspects of that life, aspects of her ego, aspects of her fear that she's not attractive enough to make a career in the Follies, but she succeeds. And she succeeds because she's not only a serious singer, she can also be a comedian. So that's Julie Stein in the 1950s. Leonard Bernstein, working with Compton and Green on Wonderful Town, and then with Stephen Sondheim, was the beginning of another revolution in the Broadway musical with West Side Story. West Side Story was a book musical based, again, on a play by Shakespeare, Romeo and Juliet, but it had 3 deaths in it. And for the first time, there was a darker element to a musical. It did not win the Tony Award for Best Musical. That went to a more popular show, a brighter show, The Music Man. But West Side Story has had a lot of revivals. But in 1957, it was a little disturbing because there were gangs on the Upper West Side of Manhattan fighting for turf. And so this song, Something's Comin', The Dance at the Gym, Maria, Johnny Mathis had a huge hit with Maria that took the song outside of the show. But these songs really served, again, the characters in the show, especially the balcony scene with Tonight. But then, because Leonard Bernstein came from the world of classical music, Tonight came back a second time in the show as a quintet, an operatic form. 5 different groups or individuals singing parts of Tonight, getting ready for the rumble that takes place that night. And later in the show, we have I Feel Pretty, Somewhere, and then a duet, again in an operatic style. A Boy Like That, I Have a Love. Anita and Maria are arguing about her love for a person not of their community. And they sing at each other and to each other, and it becomes a very powerful soprano, mezzo-soprano duet. And again, Lenny Bernstein brought that idea, those ideas from the world of opera and classical music into the Broadway musical. As I said, it did not win the Tony Award for Best Musical because Meredith Willson, a musician himself, wrote the book, composed the music, wrote the lyrics for The Music Man in 1957, and that won the Tony Award. And again, Rock Island, the opening number, which is without musical accompaniment. It's a group of traveling salesmen talk singing about the experience of being on the road constantly, on trains constantly, going to small towns to sell different products. It included other songs like You Got Trouble, right here in Rapid City. Good Night, My Someone, 76 trombones. That's the same melody, used in 2 different tempos. But it's the same melody that is used both for a love song and for a march, 76 trombones. So Wilson brought some new ideas to the theater. I've mentioned Fiddler on the Roof. Well, Jerry Bach and Sheldon Harnick, before Fiddler, had created Fiorello, a musical about Fiorello LaGuardia, the 1930s in New York City. And it included, again, very successful songs, but very specific ones. A Little Tin Box. You know, if I put a nickel in my little tin box each week, I have enough money to buy a yacht. Okay, the lies that politicians tell people to justify the kind of money they're making. Politics and Poker. I Love a Cop. So songs that really did serve a purpose, but have had a life outside the show as well. And then, of course, Fiddler on the Roof in 1964 was a huge success. Hal Prince decided he couldn't direct it because he said, I'm Jewish, but I come from Europe. I don't understand shtetl life. He said, I know exactly the man to do it, Jerry Robbins. Jerry Robbins had previously staged and choreographed West Side Story, so he knew what he was doing, and he created a brilliant show with Fiddler on the Roof. And it really is 1905, eastern part of Russia. It's a shtetl. And he kept asking the composer and lyricist, now, what is this show about? And they kept saying, well, it's about Tevye wanting to get his 5 daughters married. And he said, no, what's it about? And finally, Sheldon Harnick said, oh, it's about tradition. And Robin says, okay, that gives me a direction to go. And it is about tradition, and about tradition changing, family having to leave the old way of life and come to a new world because the world is changing badly. So again, a serious musical, very much like West Side Story. 1964, Hal Prince was concerned that what would they do after the Jewish groups got to see it? Who else would come? And Robin says this is really a bigger story than that. And it ran for 8 years. So it really did appeal to all kinds of audiences. And that gets us to Jerry Herman, who had one of the last successful book musicals, Hello, Dolly, in 1964. Ribbons Down My Back, he thought was going to be a hit song. He didn't realize Hello, Dolly would be it. Put On Your Sunday Clothes, Before the Parade Passes By, again, songs that very much serve the purpose of the show, but are also extremely popular outside it. Jerry Herman continued as a book musical composer into the 1980s, and in 1983 did a show that was, again, revolutionary, very much like West Side Story in 57. It was La Cage aux Folles. It was a show about being gay, about being transvestite. It included What Are We? We Are What We Are. And later, I Am What I Am. And Masculinity, The Best of Times, Song on the Sand. It really, in 1983, the AIDS crisis was just occurring, and this was a show putting that other world, that secret world, on stage. And so Jerry really did continue the tradition from Rodgers and Hammerstein through Bernstein of telling stories about real people and using songs to serve that. 1966 was the beginning of the last thing I'm going to talk about today, the concept musical. Now, the concept musical, Company and Cabaret, were the 2 earliest ones. Cabaret first in 1966, Company in 1970. John Kander and Fred Ebb created Cabaret. Willkommen is the opening number. It's back on Broadway again. Perfectly marvelous. Tomorrow Belongs to Me, a song about the rise of Nazism. The Money Song, and a powerful song, If You Could See Her Through My Eyes. She doesn't look Jewish at all, was the last line, and Hal Prince in 1966 was concerned that would offend audiences. So he told Joel Grey, we're going to change that line. She doesn't look Mieskite at all. Joel Grey many nights would forget and sing the original lyrics. She doesn't look Jewish at all. When it came time to make the film, they had realized, okay, this show is not offending people. They went back to the original line. But again, a serious show about serious things. But this time, the book was not so important. The story was not so important. It was situations. And Company even more so. Company is about Bobby, the unmarried friend of 5 married couples. And it really doesn't end with a marriage. It doesn't have a happy ending, although he sings Being Alive at the end. But it's about what marriage is about, and about the ways in which marriage can fail. 1970 was a different world in America than 1943 or 1927. We were in the midst of the Vietnam War. We had protests in the streets, and we had the feminist revolution starting, the gay revolution about to start. It was a time in which difficult issues were being presented on stage, and Company is very much about, failure. These are marriages that are not huge successes. The little things you do together. Sorry, Grateful. Okay? Sorry, Grateful is a song about how do you feel about your wife? Well, sometimes I'm sorry, sometimes I'm grateful. Stephen Sondheim in an interview said that his favorite idea was the dash between 2 words, the words that were antitheses, that contradicted each other. And he puts that into his songs. Sondheim is musically more elaborate than most of the composers who came before him, and as a result, he is less popular. He has not had as many hit songs, although anyone who knows Sondheim knows the beauty of what he composes. But his songs very much serve the shows in which they are put, as do the songs of Kander and Ebb. I mentioned Cabaret, I've mentioned Company. Kander and Ebb have a follow-up show, 1975, called Chicago, in which two women who kill men get a career on the stage. And it's based on actual things that happened in Chicago in the 1920s. And again, conceptual. Bob Fosse, who choreographed and directed it and actually participated in writing the script, conceived of it as a vaudeville, okay, or a circus. It's a way in which we present things that no one in the real world would ever believe. But if I go into a law room, a courtroom, as a lawyer, I can get away with anything as long as I play my game. And so it was, again, a conceptual musical rather than a book-heavy musical. Ending with two more Sondheim shows, Follies, 1971, and something to say about Sondheim, as unpopular as he is among some people, he won the Tony Award for Best Musical 3 years in a row, for Company, Follies, and A Little Night Music. And in each case, he really created a score that served the purpose of the show. A Little Night Music is about failed marriages again, but is set in the 19th century in Sweden, and so he composes everything in some version of three-quarter time, because it's a little light music, eine kleine Nachtmusik, based on Mozart. And so he is doing a classical kind of approach to his score. A Weekend in the Country, Liaisons, and Praise of Women. There are a lot of very powerful songs in the show, but one song became a hit. Ironically, it was a song he composed overnight, because Hal Prince said, we need a song for Glynis Johns in the second act scene, and literally overnight he created Send in the Clowns. And he has said that, one of the reasons it's so successful is it was composed so quickly. He did not give it the complexity that he would ordinarily give to his music. So those were three shows of his, 3 wins in a row, followed with a little bit of a gap until 1979, when he created what he said is not an opera. I once was in a room with a group of people asking him questions for an hour and a half, and one person said, why don't you compose an opera? And he said, I'm middle period Ravel. I don't have enough skill to compose an opera. Well, he created one that opera companies believe is an opera, and that's Sweeney Todd, the Demon Barber of Fleet Street. It has been performed at the Chicago Lyric Opera, Royal Opera House in London. Bryn Tervel has sung in it. It really is a powerful score. And so that takes us to the end of a journey that started with pop songs being written for vaudeville, songs being written for book musicals, and then musicals that are concept musicals that very often serve a very strong purpose. Have a Little Priest at the end of Act 1, a discussion on how to get rid of the bodies of people Sweeney Todd murders, is not a pleasant scene. So the musical in some ways has grown up since the 1920s, and it continues to grow, but now it goes in other directions as well. Thank you. Now we have time for some questions. Okay, we have some time for questions. The first place on the list. Is Armand. Is there any questions from anyone at Armand?
No, not at the moment.
Okay. East Meadow. Okay. Okay, East Meadow, do you have any questions?
No, we have no questions, thank you.
Okay.
No, we don't. East Northport, do you have any questions? East Northport, do you have any questions? No, we have no questions.
East Northport? Does anyone have any questions there?
No questions. We have no questions. We can't. We have no questions. Oh, you can't hear me.
Lynbrook, do you have any questions?
I'm not. No, we have no questions. Thank you.
Massapequa. Massapequa, do you have any questions? Massapequa, do you have any questions?
Yes, we have one question. What are some of the more common instruments used in musicals?
Well, again, it'll vary depending upon the musical, but certainly there's a string section, there will be a brass section. Musicals today, because of costs, are much smaller orchestras than they were in the past. I directed Gypsy last fall, and we had 23 musicians in the pit. Half of them strings, half of them brass, plus percussion. Sometimes a piano is included, but more modern musicals very often turn to synthesizers because they can't afford to have that many musicians. But the strings are really important in most musicals. Okay, Woodcliff Lake, any questions? Woodcliff Lake, any questions?
Yes, do you hear me?
Yes? Yes.
Why you didn't play some songs, some music?
We didn't have time to do that. It would be nice to do, but it would
We
take.
don't hear you.
Take
I'm
a longer
sorry.
program. It would be nice to do, but it would take a longer program.
It will take what? Longer
long.
program. Okay.
Too long.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. North Hills, any question? North Hills, any question?
What are your thoughts on some of the newer Broadway shows that are out there?
Well, they've changed. I mean, some shows fail in spite of the fact that they have pretty good scores. Ghosts, Bonnie and Clyde in recent years, the Bridges of Madison County have had really good scores, but they've not been able to find an audience. And that is part of the problem. Either you're a huge success like a Phantom of the Opera or you're a failure. It's really hard to have a middle ground show any longer. But there have been some good shows. And of course there are the huge commercial successes that just keep running, like Wicked. Chicago is in its 12th or 13th year in revival. Phantom of the Opera has been there forever, it seems. But there have been some more modest shows. In the Heights a few years ago was a really successful show, but that's more difficult to have an extended run any longer. North Woodmere, any questions?
Unmuted.
North Woodmere, any questions?
We have no questions, thank you.
Westbury, any questions? Any questions?
We have no questions, but thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. White Plains, any questions?
Hi, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Great. I had a question. In your opinion, what do you think was the most influential musical piece in Broadway?
In its history, I would pick West Side Story because it showed that you could do something in depth, but I would also, I'd be competing with Guys and Dolls and with South Pacific, two other shows that really were very, very powerful and quite different, each in our own way. So I think, there are a lot of horses in the horse race, and it's hard to pick just one as the winner. But I would certainly include those three. Okay, well, thank you very much. I enjoyed doing this. Hope to see you again sometime.